Welcome to an episode of the Bonafide, where we're going over a commentary and explanation of Sahih Muslim. So what are we talking about today?
Bismillah, let's get right into it. Okay. This is book 47, Kitab al-Ilm, the book of knowledge.
The book of knowledge.
The book of knowledge.
You know, the way that these things are titled, it almost reminds me of, you ever play like Warcraft?
No, I know Warcraft.
Okay.
Never played.
So in it, you know, you got these little totems that you can get, like these books. And the more books you get, the more you get to power up and more abilities you have. And so... like among them is like the book of knowledge and the book of this and the book of that. And so when you said the book of knowledge, it immediately triggered many happy memories.
All right, so Bilal is telling us a little bit about his video game history. MashaAllah.
Warcraft 3, Frozen Throne, Defense of the Ancients, what is today known as just by itself Dota. No? League of Legends, anybody?
Hadith number 12. Your input is very valuable. It is. No sarcasm.
This is book, what, 47?
Yes.
Okay.
By the way, you brought up a good point. When we say the book of, what does that mean? Because it sounds weird
considering Sahih Muslim in of itself is a book by itself.
Right.
Yeah.
Volumes of, yes.
So it's a volume.
No, so book in Arabic, kitab, the way that it was classified in hadith, for us, it would be closer to chapter.
Okay.
Or part. Okay, so you have, let's say, chapter, 47, knowledge.
Okay.
Let's just say chapter, knowledge, right? And then within it, you have...
so book is literally should be synonymous with chapter.
That's the closest thing.
Okay.
That I can think of. Maybe there's a better suggestion.
And then you have door,
and then within
this,
it, you have
that.
bab. Yeah, but it's not literally door.
Okay.
Right? Bab, you can say section or part of the chapter.
Okay.
Right? You have the section on this, the section on this, the section on this.
Okay.
That's pretty much it.
Cool.
Yeah. The literal translation is the book of knowledge, the book of dreams, the book of drinks.
Section. So is abwab or bab a word that could be meaning many different things based on how it's used in a sentence?
Well, in that context, it's
like for example, you'll see Bab al-Abu Bakr, right?
Okay.
Bab al-Umar, right?
Well, yeah, that's literal.
Right.
Yeah.
And then here you have Bab this, Bab that, or in the Quran you have Ulil al-Bab.
Okay, that's completely different.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, is this like a transformative word? Like a transformer word that can become anything and any...
No. You can't use it for everything and anything.
Okay.
But, I mean, you can try, but you'll probably have some weird reactions. No, in this case, we would say the closest thing is probably subchapter.
Okay.
Or section of a chapter.
Section, okay.
Yeah. So we're doing, let's say, the chapter of knowledge.
Okay.
And the hadith number 12. I'm going to need your input.
Sure.
Because your input is always interesting. And even if I didn't ask for your input, I'm sure I'd get it. Right? I'm sure would get it.
The charm of having me along.
MashaAllah. We should change the name of all these shows. I mean, like these are the Bilal shows with or featuring somebody else.
Well, it's called Tag Along.
Sure.
Tag Along with me.
Right. So they should all be like Bonafide with Bilal featuring, let's say, the 99 Names of Allah with Ahmad Shukri. Suleiman, Sahih Muslim, whatever you want.
You're saying to rename
this is
everything?
Your show.
Well, I guess in a way.
No, it is.
I mean, it's like the Dilly Show, right? On
sure.
Like you can change out the host.
Inviting guests, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're not changing out the host, are you?
No, you can.
You can.
Right. So Absolutely. It was John Stewart before, and now it's Trevor Noah.
Qatida radiyallahu anhu.
He's like, whatever, man.
Reported that Anas bin Malik radiyallahu anhu said,
okay.
Shall I not narrate to you a hadith which I heard from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and
yes,
no one else would narrate to you after me who would have personally heard this from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Okay.
Meaning I had the good fortune to hear this and nobody else heard this.
Exclusive listener.
This is what he's saying.
Okay.
Radiyallahu anhu. So what is he relaying from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? It is from the signs of the last hour that knowledge would be taken away.
Okay.
Ignorance would prevail upon the world. Adultery would become common.
Okay.
Wine or intoxicants would be drunk. The number of men will fall short, and the number of women would survive or outlast the number of men until there are 50 women for every man.
Okay.
This is the end of the hadith.
Sure.
Now, there's a lot to say about this hadith. The first, if we believe, as we do, that the Prophet ﷺ received wahi aside from the Quran, his knowledge about religious matters is revelation.
Sure.
Right? وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى. He does not speak from his desire. Everything
That's a principle that as a Muslim we understand.
must believe in. Absolutely. And this is one of the proofs for the preservation of the hadith and the sunnah.
It is also the appropriate stature of a prophet.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That they would not speak on religious matters from their own, desires.
Right. Okay.
In huwa illa wahyu yuha. He is merely a conveyor who is given the revelation.
He's the mailman.
He's the messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Okay.
I don't want to give an analogy for that one, but I understand. So, what does this mean? There is wahi outside of the Quran.
Okay.
Right? So he's telling us from the signs of the hour. So all of the things that he's about to share are wahi, are revelation. We must believe that these are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay.
The reason I mention this as a first reflection is because many times you and
Why
I...
would he be the only one who has this and not other people? Especially considering something of the last hour is of a...
You mean the companion?
Yes.
We'll get to that. But
Okay.
before we get to that point, let's finish the first point, which is that many Muslims, they'll read the Quran and be like, yes, this is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is so important, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
They read a hadith like, yeah, it's a hadith, it's just a hadith.
It's just
Don't
a
realize
hadith.
this is a religious matter, then it must be, if it's a religious matter in that hadith,
Okay.
this is wahi as well. It's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala
Sure.
to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, relaying it to us.
Okay.
Now, it's not verbatim always, but it is in meaning. As for this point, why did the companion say I'm the only one to have received it? Some of the scholars, when they commented on this, they said perhaps he didn't know if anybody else had received it.
Okay.
Right?
To
Or-
that companion's knowledge, he's the only one who ever
Right.
received it.
And perhaps the reason is that when he heard it, it was just him and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Okay.
So he had assumed I'm the only one that heard this.
Okay.
Right? And the hadith
So
is...
he's conveying it out of doing right by the Prophet ﷺ to convey to other people because he assumes that he's
Absolutely.
the only one that knows it.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
even if he had assumed others had heard it, many of the companions would narrate a hadith
Okay.
anyway, just to continue spreading the truth.
Sure. Okay.
Right. Okay, the second point, the Prophet ﷺ is telling us knowledge will be lifted. Right? So there will be a decrease in religious knowledge.
Okay.
Other hadith
Now, here's the thing. How do we know that when they say that knowledge will be lifted, it is specific to knowledge of the hereafter and the soul and spirituality and not of knowledge in general? Because there's...
I'll tell you how.
Okay.
And maybe I'm incorrect, so you can correct me. When we look at worldly knowledge,
Sure.
or let's say secular knowledge, we see that it is constantly progressing.
Okay.
There are always advancements, discoveries, more research. It's only increasing in terms of quantity.
Well, okay.
And even you can
at
argue
least even
quality.
in now, but like one could always present that scenario. There's this actually disaster film coming out where
Of course there is.
where it's basically they're able to control like the weather of the world and stuff, and then
Okay.
something goes wrong in the tech, and it just kind of destroys everything, right?
Wow.
But like the idea that like imagine like a lot of the things that we have, it's like stored in the cloud on these servers,
Okay.
right? Elsewhere, and some sort of redundancies would fail or what have you. All that is gone. So then, if that were to ever happen, the likelihood of it happening is not that great. But if there's a natural disaster of sort that could put a blackout, like that's a secular knowledge disappearing,
Okay.
right? But I'm just wondering in regards to this situation.
This is explained and clarified how. Why do the scholars say, why do commentators on this hadith say this is religious knowledge? Because the other hadith that are similar to this, they explain how. How? Through the death of the scholars,
Okay.
the ulama, right? So their death, as we see nowadays, their death is another kind of, not a hit to the ummah, but it's you lost a scholar, you lost a gem, you lost a treasure. Everything with him is gone,
Okay.
right? Except what he wrote down. And usually they have way more knowledge, the scholars, than what they are actually conveying. Otherwise, they would be writing constantly.
Right. Okay. Because what they've written is, I guess, consolidated, filtered, and extracted stuff so that there's something really specific in there.
Right.
Okay. So the other hadith further explained the issue of the hereafter, not the hereafter, the last days, of the situation of knowledge.
The death of the scholars.
Death of scholars. Okay.
And that's why every time a scholar passes away, we reflect on this hadith.
Okay.
Because it's a big loss for the ummah. Allahu A'lam. Which brings us to the next point. As knowledge, let's say that the focus here is religious knowledge. As that decreases because the scholars are passing away, and less people are pursuing knowledge, less people care about religion in general, as we get closer to the Day of Judgment, ignorance will become more widespread.
Okay.
Right? So this is due to lack of passion of religion, of knowledge, the priority of knowledge in the ummah. And one example, when I went overseas to study,
Yeah.
they were shocked. They're like, "You're coming from America to study in our universities?
Sure.
We have nothing here. We're the ones who are trying to get to America.
Okay.
Right? So their idea was, you guys have better universities, better education. Why are you coming here to study?
But,
I said, I'm here to study Sharia. They said,
yeah.
Sharia? That's like the lowest thing here.
Really?
The lowest grades, whoever, like in their senior year in high school, whoever gets the lowest grades usually goes into Sharia, or there's one thing below it, agriculture, for some reason.
Interesting.
Yeah, and you get...
Because here in Texas, is one of the top universities in the country.
Over there it's different, very different. So Sharia there is considered something horrible.
Okay.
If you score high on your senior year exams in high school, you can be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, something like that.
Okay.
Right? And then whatever you
and
score...
And that's translated here too, with the immigrant community of immigrants and their children.
Interesting stuff. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. So it's
almost similar in like the subcontinent region, right?
Oh, is it?
Yeah, where typically you become a Maulana because you weren't a good kid.
Wow.
Right. And like even like here in America, especially like from the New York culture, not all, but many kids that are there are sent there as if their parents are sending their kids to military school, right? Like, oh, they're sending them so they can be disciplined, so they can be straightened out, not so that they can learn the Quran, become learn knowledge. So
see, it's a problem for our ummah when 2 points. The first is when we're sending I don't mean this in a bad way, but the least disciplined or the least academic students or the worst students in terms of grades into Sharia or Darul Uloom or something. We're sending the worst people into that.
Yeah.
Yes, many of them will change, they'll grow, they'll produce great things for the ummah, but also you're potentially sending a lot of people who are not going to do it justice or twist something or use something the wrong way. Not that I'm advocating for everyone to study it.
Right.
But it should not be something that we consider the lowest. We should have more respect for our own traditions. Right, for our knowledge, for our ummah. It should be something that's, looked up to.
Sending the best of the best as
Send
opposed
the best
to the
people
worst
to study.
Best. The worst of the worst.
Yeah.
That's not worst of the best.
Worst of the best.
I mean, worst of the best wouldn't be so bad either.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, so that's the point about ignorance. And there's a hadith that actually basically comments on this issue more. Ignorance will become widespread at the end of times to the extent that the ignorant people will be asked for their opinions and verdicts, and they'll pass them based on reasoning, like personal desires.
Sounds like news broadcasting today.
Well, it could also be a number of social media platforms, Muslims or anyone with large following. They're sharing their own personal desires, their own opinions. Yeah, I don't believe this should be permissible. I don't think this should be prohibited, based on what? Pure reasoning.
But the question is, who asked you?
Well, people follow.
Okay.
Right? People care about celebrity status, numbers. If they see someone with a large following,
but let me ask you this:
they'll be influenced.
This from what I've observed, from what you've mentioned, what others have described, of the time during then. Similar situations also happen where people may or may not have been the most qualified to address things, but they had large followings, and so the people who were the most qualified didn't necessarily get the same kind of backing, i.e. Imam Bukhari. Like, is it similar to them?
No, I would say in terms of how common it is, it's extremely common now. It's so normal now for everyone to give their opinion about every religious matter.
There's no barrier to entry in terms of being able to get your voice heard.
Right.
Okay.
Whereas at that time, no, even Imam al-Bukhari, rahimahullah, what we spoke about earlier was like, that was a fitna that took place. In terms of him before that, everyone flocked to hear Imam al-Bukhari. Everyone flocked to hear Imam Ahmad. Okay. They had huge followings. And of course, there are deviant people that did as well. But now in our times, what I'm pointing out is that with technology and globalization, everything being interconnected and everyone just pretty much having access to one another, you find that it's free for all. Everyone talk about whatever you want in terms of religion. But when it comes to medicine, why isn't this person with 1 million followers, for example, saying, well, I believe if you have this, then you absolutely have cancer?
Well, because they could get sued and lose everything that they have.
Okay, so they're worried about like a worldly matter, but what about everyone's afterlife, right? So where do qualifications kick in? I'm not saying, I'm not advocating for any kind of standard or saying don't speak about religion. What I'm saying is we have to learn what our boundaries are. Yeah. And I say that to myself always first and foremost. Know what your boundaries are in terms of speaking about the religion without knowledge. Yeah. Otherwise, that's how people go astray. And if we're doing this so much on social media to the extent that we're not thinking twice anymore and it becomes normal to comment on every single religious matter without knowledge, we'll find that a lot of people are being, their hereafter is going to be affected by what we're saying. And that's dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, the FCC of the hereafter is going to hold them accountable.
It's It's amazing how you come up with these interesting
Interesting
things.
Like these are the enforcers of
FCC.
the Federal Communications Commission.
Wow, I never heard that one before.
Well, no,
Of the hereafter, I mean.
Oh, of the hereafter.
The FCC of the hereafter. That's like the title of this episode now. Okay.
I mean, how else would you describe it? You spoke on behalf of someone where you had no authority to speak, and therefore we're going to hold you accountable and fine you by taking this amount of good deeds away from you, adding this many bad deeds on top of you, and this much sentencing in the hellfire.
Number 4.
Okay, fine.
Adultery will become widespread.
Okay.
Now, we see
when you say adultery, or are you
includes adultery and fornication.
Okay.
Right? Zina will become widespread.
Lewdness. Is
Okay.
that different?
Lewdness as well, but this literally is referring to adultery.
Okay.
Right? Adultery and fornication. In
Gotcha.
general, any kind of impermissible intercourse. So this is extremely widespread.
Yeah.
To the extent that it's not seen as something, strange anymore. That's you, not me.
Okay.
It's become the norm in most societies.
Yeah.
We can't say all, but it's become the norm in many societies, and a trend that's followed in other societies.
I mean, I think the issue comes into play where certain things become legalized, right? Or a prohibition is lifted, right?
Okay.
So, like, for example, in this context, in the Western context, as long as whatever they do is consensual, there's nothing illegal.
Right.
Whereas Islamically, it's inappropriate.
Right.
So I guess the question that comes into play is the normalization through legalization, but then at the same time is where does one, or are we talking about the fact that it's just widespread as not only it's legal, but it's also normal?
Right.
Okay.
It's the norm. It's common. It's accepted. It's not seen as something strange in society anymore.
Okay.
I mean, in this culture at least, right? Whereas, and you brought up a good point, which is the issue of what do Muslims basically do with all these things becoming legal or accepted by people.
Yeah.
And this is actually very important, especially we have every upcoming generation dealing with more, let's say, immorality from our perspective as Muslims, right? So we have a moral reference that does not change from time and place.
Okay.
Right? Are there things within fiqh that might change and they're flexible? Yes, but in terms of the major sins like adultery, like drinking, yeah, these things will never be permissible.
Right.
In terms of the default ruling.
No, let me ask this. In Christianity, one of the things that you hear about is the 7 deadly sins.
Okay.
Right? Which is like gluttony, greed.
And they have the 10 Commandments.
Yeah. So is that something that translates over into Islamic setup?
Well, no, we don't have like the 7 deadly sins.
Okay.
There is a hadith that mentions 7 sins and
Okay.
others, but generally speaking, if you look at Imam al-Dhahabi's book Al-Kabair, the major sins.
The major sins. So the major
Right.
sins is not seven,
Right,
not
it's not
necessarily the same thing as the 7. Okay.
Right. And Al-Kabair, you can find it at maybe, I believe it's between 70 or 80 major sins.
So is there differences of opinion as to what the
Al-Kabair
majors?
are?
Yeah.
Maybe a few of them, but
Okay.
perhaps most of them are agreed upon. Why? Because...
But you're like it's 70 or 80, not 7.
No, it's not 7 for sure.
Okay.
No. Al-Kabair are between 70 and 80,
Okay.
according to Imam al-Dhahabi's book.
Gotcha.
Right, and the reason, for example, what makes something a major sin? Why is adultery a major sin? Why is drinking a major sin? How do you classify it as major or minor? You find that one of the definitions is that any sin that's mentioned with a punishment of the hereafter, or a had or a punishment in this life, or the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay.
So this would be
So
considered
something
a major
that's
sin.
not only a sin but also a crime.
Right.
Right? Because like for example, something that's a sin is not fasting without any reason or not praying.
Yeah, well that's
right?
a major sin.
Right, but that's not necessarily a crime.
Oh, you're talking about in terms of a had punishment.
Yeah.
That's very different.
Yeah.
Because some sins have punishments for them here in this
Yeah.
world. I mean, assuming all the other conditions of an Islamic society are there, right?
Right. So like an action, a sin, that's also a crime and has social implications and a verdict to go along with it.
Yes,
so to speak,
but-
if there's a with trial and all
yeah,
that.
so I wouldn't say it's the word crime doesn't include all the major sins because
Okay.
it's a crime against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the boundaries of Allah.
Sure.
Whereas some of them just simply there are no punishments for them in this life,
Okay.
right? In terms of
So
society.
Okay, because I remember I forgot what the discussion was about, but somebody was explaining how, there are things that you can do that are either a crime in this world, but not necessarily a crime spiritually. i.e., parking illegally, crossing a red
yes,
light.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, but as for major sins, we can say they are crimes.
Right, and then they're describing that there are actions that you can commit that are a crime and are a sin, spiritually speaking, as well, i.e., murder.
Yes.
I.e., adultery and fornication.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So you're saying with the law.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there are actions that are a sin, but not necessarily a crime.
Right.
And among them, like not fasting and not praying.
A crime in like the Western context, or like the land you're in.
Yeah, but like even like some of these things, like because we're also talking about this is a big part of Islam, at least from the hadith and the laws that are derived from it, have worldly social application as well.
Absolutely.
Right. And so and from those worldly social applications is the creation of laws which determine whether somebody is committing a crime or not.
Right.
So I'm just wondering if does like at one this, and I guess this is part of a larger discussion, and you let me know if it is. At what point do laws that were extracted from hadith, right, in other civilizations and other nations, other empires, other kingdoms, they are not necessarily applicable in another empire or another nation and another time?
If they're not based on just purely the culture,
Okay.
And they're based on rulings that the vast majority of the body of the ummah agrees on, then they would apply to every place.
Okay.
Right? But in terms of being carried out as a law, they wouldn't all be applied.
Okay.
Because living, for example, as minorities in most countries around the world, you can't really carry out laws.
Okay.
Right? You follow the law of the land.
So this idea of creeping Sharia.
Creeping Sharia. Okay, that is definitely a discussion for another video. It's a fear, and it's fear mongering.
Okay.
Right? Because Sharia is the way I eat, dress, sleep, pray.
And it goes back into the understanding of like the term Sharia is a very broad and general.
Absolutely. Sharia is everything in
like
Islam.
Sunnah
right?
is very broad and general term to tell somebody that's not Sunnah. Well, according to Usul, it might be.
Well, that's what you're going to keep doing there, aren't you? Well, the fear, of course, for Western audiences who don't know anything about Islam and they only hear about Sharia from like Fox News.
Sharia law.
Right. Their fear is, they're trying to impose it on us. Right. And I would fear somebody trying to come and impose his laws on me if I don't follow those laws. Like that are religious laws, right? And it's a misunderstanding, or it's a twisted interpretation, or out of context statements, or pure malicious intentions to try to basically remove Muslims from this country and whatnot. But really, if any of these people had actually met a Muslim, a basic average Muslim, and asked them, hey, are you trying to impose Sharia on me? They'd be like, I don't even know what Sharia is. The average Muslim doesn't really know. So this whole creeping Sharia thing is just blown out of proportion.
Okay.
Maybe I shouldn't say blown, but it's out of proportion. So, all right, number 5. So again, with number 4, with the issue of adultery, one of the biggest struggles is for the youth or for the upcoming generations who have to try to resist things that are seen as accepted.
Right.
Not just accepted, even normal
even
and encouraged in society.
Like even in high school today, right? You talk about abstinence.
Right.
Right? And abstinence not in the sense of, hey, let's not, fool around. But like, hey, here's how you make sure you don't get pregnant.
Right. Yeah.
So
it's a struggle, and this is one of the reasons we know, based on another report, that at the end of times, to summarize, that at the end of times, holding on to one's faith will be like holding on to a hot coal.
Right.
It'll be more difficult.
But that reality was actually real during like the Inquisition time.
That's true.
And I think even one of the fatwa that was passed for them was describing as a letter to them, for those who are holding onto their faith like it's hot coal, do this.
Interesting.
Because it was fascinating. And this is one of the things that Dr. Abdullah Hakim Quick shares in his class, New Dawn, the rise and fall of Islamic civilization in Spain.
Yeah.
When the Inquisition took place, like they would start burning Muslims at the stake.
Yeah.
Because they were at that point forcibly converted to Christianity. So you had the Mudajjars and the Moriscos, right? Mudajjars were Jews who were converted to Christianity, and Moriscos were the Muslims that converted to Islam. But down, low key, they were still what they were. And if they got caught, they were in big trouble with the law at the time. And so the question was, how do you practice your faith? And the letter that was written by the Mufti is like, hey, consider these options. and it would have opened with that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Somehow that's a great reminder too.
Yeah.
Be steadfast, be resilient, no matter how many things around you are. But see the difference between that's an amazing time to bring that up, right? This is more of like general advice, like, immorality will spread. Nobody will force it on you, but it'll become so common, so encouraged, so accepted everywhere and anywhere around you, in every kind of media as well, that you have to be really resilient and steadfast.
But here's another question.
Sure.
In regards to immorality, like fornication, adultery, alcohol, that was something that was normal and accepted during the Prophet's time as well.
Well, here's the thing you got to keep in mind. In some cultures, even if there isn't widespread, let's say in some cultures, even if there aren't Islamic rules, the culture itself looks down on some kinds of moral issues. But it's not.
Nobody will say that, drinking, like getting blackout drunk is a virtuous thing. I don't know anybody.
No, but even adultery, and not just fornication. Adultery, like in this country 200 years ago, was not encouraged at all. Right? Yeah. People were like, "Why are you cheating on your spouse? You've betrayed your spouse. You deserve whatever happens to you," and so on and so forth. Yeah. And even recently, I forgot what the scandal was. There was like a hack of a famous website. Sure. And basically, it was a marital affair website. Okay. Right? I don't want to mention the name, but it was a marital affair website. Yeah. All these names got leaked. Right. Right?
There were like politicians and stuff on
there. A lot of people on there, politicians and others. Some supposedly framed, others not. Yeah. The point is, a lot of names came out. These people were cheating on their spouses. Right? Allegedly cheating on their spouses. Those let's talk only about those who actually signed up to cheat on their spouses, right? For whatever reason. I don't know their circumstances, whatever it may be. Now, when it was exposed, if you read the sad comments that we read with every article, sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're sad, sometimes they're just whatever. So you find that the vast majority of people were like, hey, you deserve it, right? You deserve to have been exposed. You weren't doing something good, no matter what your circumstances were. So we find that, generally speaking, there are still things society says, no, don't do it. Why can't you punch, somebody in the face? Right? A random person in the face.
Well, because you might get punched in the face.
You might get punched in the face. But why, for example, if we see somebody beating up a child, you're going to get upset.
Well, yeah, you're going to get upset, but the other reason would be you might get charged with assault and battery.
That's true. No, but if you're watching is what I'm saying. Why is that? Why does that anger people? It's a moral issue. Right. But where do your morals come from? What makes it accepted or not accepted? If everybody in your country or everybody on an island says, hey, it's okay to commit murder or rape, are you going to say it's okay to commit murder or rape?
No, of course not.
But why not? Not you as Bidan. Right. Generally, why would somebody say not? No.
Because if everybody, it's just weird.
Well, see, that's your morality speaking, mashallah. Generally, I mean, if you're talking about it from our Darwinian perspective, survival of the fittest, right? That's what they'll advocate for. When you
is it survival of the fittest or survival of the collective?
That's a great question.
Because that's another argument.
That's a different argument.
Yeah. But the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
That's true.
One thing it's a theme that's
true. That's true. We believe as Muslims, for example, one of the purposes of Sharia is to benefit all of society. Yeah. If the individual versus society, if there's a debate between the two, society takes preference over the individual, right? And that's applied in different ways. But going back to this, there has to be a moral compass, a moral reference, in order for there to be divine, excellent results. Okay. Because we are all flawed. And if we're going with the trend of what's happening around us, we're literally enslaved to our desires and the desires of trends of society. Sure. Whereas our compass, our reference, comes from a divine source that is excellent, it is pure, beyond this world. It comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So no matter what society says is acceptable or prohibited or whatever, we have our moral compass. We have our moral reference. And even within theology, there are many arguments, even for the existence of God, the arguments from morality. Okay. Right? And that's a whole different discussion. So again, to those who might be struggling for whatever reason because of society, stick to your values, stick to your principles, no matter how accepted or common something becomes. That's where resilience really kicks in. That's where the status in the sight of Allah increases. So adultery will become widespread. Number 5, alcohol would be very common. Sure. Right? And I really don't have anything to say. I think everyone's aware of how common it is.
But here's the thing. I think there's a balance also in the commonality of alcohol. People are also respective of those who don't drink.
Yes, that's true. I agree. So alcohol is not, it's not encouraged, and you're not seen as someone strange for not drinking. Right. In some circles, I guess.
Not even in a happy hour setting, right? Right. Post-war kind of thing.
Right. There are a lot of people who don't drink. If anything, I was speaking to a non-Muslim who said he stopped drinking for a few months, and now when he goes out with his friends on the weekends, he says after 2-3 hours, my friends are all acting, this is what he said they're acting like animals, and I'm the only normal person there. He said I stopped going. He's like, now I hang out at juice bars all night, and I socialize, and he's like, I'm no longer looking forward to losing my mind, or numbing my mind. So it's interesting. You find many different people who don't drink.
And you know what's interesting is that there is a subtle rise of juice bars across this country.
Right.
And you'll find that there'll people like even here in Houston, in the Clear Lake area. And a shout out to Nocturne.
That's what I was referring to.
No, but like there are several. Like even here in Chinatown, there's a couple of these juice bars where people like they're open late, 1-2 a.m. in the morning, and people are not there to get drunk.
Right. So it's interesting. Well, there's two things I want to say about this point and the last one. So adultery, alcohol. You brought up a good point, which is about the major sins. Al-Kaba'ir. One point to emphasize: when we say there are an estimated 70 to 80 major sins in Islam, to some people this might seem like a lot, but if you think about what is mubah, what is permissible in this world,
I mean that's like that is infinite.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can't
cannot
even count
compare
it.
like a dot to like an ocean.
Like what is required of you to do? There's a finite numbers of those.
Absolutely.
And what is required of you to not to do, there's also a finite number of those. But then in between is just like total freedom.
Unlimited number of things we cannot begin to count. And another point to add to this, the things that are prohibited for us in Islam, there is a wisdom behind the prohibition. It's not just a random prohibition. There's a wisdom, and one of these wisdoms is that they are harmful for society and the individual.
And it'd be interesting to look at it from the lens of health, wealth, and wisdom.
Absolutely.
As to what is the detrimental effect or the positive effect on the things that are required of us to do on our health, wealth, and our relationships with people around us.
Absolutely agree. And we will do that, inshallah.
Inshallah.
We'll do it in Sahih Muslim class.
Yeah.
Inshallah. And then number 6, the number of men will decrease until there are 50 women for every man.
Okay.
Now this is interesting because one hadith says 50 women for every man who is a maintainer.
Okay.
Right? Like who can maintain them. And then another hadith says, and this one's reported by Bukhari, that 40 women, at the end of times, 40 women will be pursuing a man basically for intercourse or for a relationship. So the scholars say, and this goes back to the science of hadith, how do you reconcile or merge the hadith together? They're both authentic.
Well, why would you have to reconcile or merge? Why can't you take them as two different varying statements?
Well, here's why. Because someone will say, is it 50 or is it 40?
Okay.
And the answer
is one has to do with the behavior of people, and the other has to do with the demographic statistic.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And you're right. And this is where Ibn Hajar basically reconciled between the two. He said the most likely meaning is that the hadith that mentions 50 women for every man is referring to the numbers, right? Whereas the hadith of the 40 is stating explicitly they are pursuing the man for a relationship. He said at the end of times, the fitna, the trials and tribulations, temptations will become so great and the number of men so few that these 40 women are pursuing this man for a relationship, regardless of whether it's halal or haram. But with regards to the other 10 out of 50, they are most likely pursuing a relationship for the right reasons.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So that's how he reconciled it. He said these 40 are pursuing it for a prohibited relationship.
Oh, so he overlaid them.
Okay. Yes, and the last 10 out of 50 are...
But that 40 and 10 versus 1 in 50s, that's his perspective on
That's
it.
his opinion. That's his way of trying to reconcile between the hadith.
Okay.
Because it doesn't say 40 women, for example.
So essentially, his opinion is a possible reality.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a possible reality, and that's his way of attempting to reconcile between them.
Okay.
Because he says zina, adultery will become so common and more common, especially as we see it's common now already, that by the end of times, it wouldn't be surprising for 40 women to try to pursue one man. The second point is that because men are so
basically
few,
20% of people, 80% of folks, so you got the 80-20 rule going here.
Yeah, there you go, 80-20. 80-20. And then you have what the other point, which is if there is only one man for every 40 or 50 women, let's say for every 50 women, how then would they want to proceed with regards to having children? Right? So he says many of them will want a relationship. And that's where he brought in the reconciliation of 10 out of 50. They want to have some offspring because there are very few men left.
Okay.
Another point to keep in mind, a lot of people ask about this question.
Yeah.
So a lot of youth, for example, they say, well, does that mean it's going to be permissible for a man to have 40 or 50 wives at the end of times? It is a common question. Don't laugh.
No, I'm just imagining how many relationships and expectations they would have to be balancing in the situation where you have that many relationships.
Can you imagine someone being sane in 50 different relationships? Regardless of who it is, man or woman, it's just 50 relationships.
Yeah.
That's a lot of commitments, I would say.
At that point, be like, yo, I'm done committing.
I lost track of names.
Yeah.
So no, it would never be permissible for a man to marry more than 4 women. That's a whole different discussion about polygyny.
Yeah.
But it would never be permissible. This hadith is not indicating that it would be permissible, just to clarify. But rather it's indicating that there will be many women for every man. As for why, some of the scholars said, do you know of any of the reasons by any chance?
No.
Why will there be so many women for every
Well,
man?
I mean, one assumption could be war.
Yes.
Right. Another could be there was this graphic novel I read, Why the Last Man. It had to do with Y chromosome.
Okay.
And this dude just woke up one day and all the male members of all the species on Earth had just died.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so dark.
It was an interesting story and how things unfolded and what was the virus that broke out that killed everybody and
Wow.
what is it about him that allowed him to stay alive
Okay.
in that situation. But it could be something like that. Maybe there's some sort of viral outbreak that kills off male members of the human species.
Maybe.
Or I don't know. Those are the two options I can think of.
No, yeah. So the most common one that I hear in the commentaries is the potential of war killing a lot of men.
Sure.
And the second is basically something that is related more to the recent studies about the increase in the number of women.
Okay.
So the ratio is changing slowly, but it's changing.
Okay.
So they'll say that there are basically just simply going to be more births of women than men.
Okay. So just the issue of XY chromosomes versus
But
YY.
the virus thing is cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not really cool. It's scary,
No, I mean,
actually.
it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, obviously, it wouldn't happen overnight. You don't wake up one day and then everyone of one gender is all dead.
Well, I mean, it was a viral outbreak, right? It was just like thing is, it had already spread across the world, and it just
Bam.
yeah, and in fact, turned out that there were some astronauts in space who were still
Survived.
alive, but then they had a really bad crash landing.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
terrible. You read weird things.
Yo, man, Image Comics, bro, they got some great stories. So no, not Marvel, not DC, but Suleiman's just like, I don't endorse this.
I didn't say anything at all.
All right, cool. So was that the end?
So the last point on this,
Yeah.
Hudayfa radiallahu anhu said, when the fitna becomes widespread, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will distinguish between the righteous servants of His until a man is pursued by 50 women, saying what we said before. Basically, they are pursuing him for relationship or being maintained. In one narration, he says, O servant of Allah, cover me. O servant of Allah, take care of me. So he's saying these are perhaps the 10 out of the 50. Like
Okay.
they are righteous. They really do want a relationship or to be maintained or whatever. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. That sign obviously has not come yet. That
Of course,
sign of the
yeah.
Day of Judgment.
I mean,
Unless-
we're not nearly there. I mean, we
We are
might
not.
have like slightly more women than men, but not 50 to 1.
Yes. Not 50 to 1.
Cool. All right, guys. Hope you benefited from this. We will be continuing this series. We're going to take a little bit of break.
Let's
and then,
end with a dua.
Okay.
Because that is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, since we're talking about hadith.
Sure.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
السلام عليكم.
Actually, before we end, what does that mean?
What is the dua
What you
mean?
just said, yeah.
We'll have an episode about dua
No,
from the door of dua, inshallah.
Okay,
We'll talk about it in depth.
Okay, cool. Stay
Inshallah.
tuned.
Stay tuned for Bilal's next episode.